Welcome back to the garage. Today, instead of doing Jeep stuff, I'm going to go back to some woodworking for a little bit, specifically on this thing. This is a 1960s Lane Acclaim coffee table. Specifically, it's a 1961 based on the serial number. It is in terrible condition, and I knew that going into it. That's why I got it on the cheap. So the previous owner had left it in a damp location with something really heavy on this part of it, and that's caused the entire top to be bowed down right there. It'll become more apparent in just a second. The veneer, actually after that, it got rained on, so the core of this is made of particle board, and when that gets wet, these things are usually just, throw away, don't even try, not worth it. So what this video is going to end up being is either a great success, bringing one back that shouldn't have been able to come back, or it'll be a cautionary tale as to why you don't try to fix these when they've been wet. But anyways, the ends are both separated, so I'm going to have to get some of the junk out of there and see if I can squeeze that back together with a big clamp. The bow has caused this gap right here, so even though the whole thing is kind of solid, it's separated. This end is separated as well as this one, but not so bad. Again, spent many nights binging something on Netflix, trying to stabilize the veneer. It was really loose from the water, but it's all stabilized now. There were a few spots in the middle, but it was mostly on the edges that it was loose. There's no finish pretty much left on it. I would usually try to do a chemical strip, but because there's just nothing there, I'll probably go straight into a sanding disc. Carefully, because the veneer is paper thin on these. I'll probably do a 320 and just smooth it out gently. And I got the ex's dog scratched it pretty bad, so I'm gonna have to try to sand that out if it'll sand out. But the biggest sin, which makes this thing just not worth doing, even though I'm gonna try, is the side here. The entire side is off. Usually that's a death sentence to one of these. You just let it go. I like a challenge, so I'm gonna see if I can bring this one back though. Now this is actually the second video on this I've made. The first one was during the Jeep project. I was refining my video style. I don't want to try to salvage pieces of that to kind of go through what I've already done on here. Just everything's changed. But the Cliff's Notes is I already cleaned up the tenon part of this, and now you can really see just how bent that is. Just a little bit of a warp in that tabletop, huh? Just a little. But the tenon side of things is cleaned up and it should go back in. All the particle board that was missing from here has been filled in with a gratuitous amount of wood filler. Too much, in fact. I need to sand that and see if I can get things to fit together just a little bit better than they are right now. Maybe here from the side you can see just, not on a GoPro, but you can see just how thin that veneer is. So, let me grab some sandpaper and see if we can start cleaning that up and see if we can get this thing back together solid and stabilized so we can even think about trying to refinish it. Well, I guess before sanding, there's some kind of obvious areas I can just gently chisel out. One of the benefits of storing it the way it was stored was that it kind of tells me just where it was hitting. Well, after a little bit of sanding and fitting, this is about the point where I realize the futility of what I'm trying to accomplish. So this is the side where I assume the incident happened that broke this off. The top has separated. The particle board is kind of split in half. I assume that this broke down, which forced this corner up. I've got the alignment pretty good, but you can just see how much that's sticking out. I can try to C-clamp that down after gluing, but I don't think that's gonna lay flat like it needs to. I would have to sand away the veneer to kind of blend it. The gap is terrible. It's just the warpage of the whole piece. I think since this thing's been sitting around for a year unglued, maybe the warp has gotten worse on that side. The fitment on this side's not bad, but just the rest of it, the underside of it here is being all water damaged and loose. It's not gonna be perfect, and I'm kind of an obsessive perfectionist. It's frustrating because some parts of it will fit just fine, and then others are just very much out of whack. I don't know that I have enough C-clamps or clamps in general to fix this, but we'll still try. Here's that serial number if anyone was curious. Looks like 169021. These are backwards, so 12/9 of 61 would be the date this thing was manufactured. The underside is really not that terrible, aside from the finish just being worn away in a whole lot of places. It's solid. The legs are solid. With a strip and refinish, they'd come back just fine. Well, another day out here sanding and trying to do some fitment on it, and it's not looking good. This end right here is the only thing that sits about where it needs to be. From this point on the walnut veneer further, there's a huge gap thanks to how swollen the particle board core is. And this side just does not line up at all. It's got this big lip here hanging out. I haven't yet tried to close this gap because the one bar clamp I have that's long enough for this table is over there, in there. And there be dragons. So I'll have to dig that out later. But all that aside, the underside's even worse. The gap is even bigger, and it goes all the way across, of course, until the end here where it actually lines up. So I could clamp it up to where the top looks right and then have an enormous gap here on the bottom, or I could clamp it up and glue it where the bottom is closed, and that would probably be stable and offer the most support. But then I would have an absolutely enormous gap on the surface you're gonna see, and it will look terrible. So all of this basically confirms what I already knew. The previous owner should not have left it out in the rain, even if it was just for a day, because the particle board got wet, it's swollen, and it's ruined. But I don't want to give up on it just yet. Basically, you've seen what I've seen. It's ruined. But that frees me a little bit to find a bunch of wood filler somewhere around, I can't remember what shelf, I think it's over there. But got a big old tub of wood filler. And I'm gonna go to town on this thing and fill in all the gaps and hope the wood filler will actually take some stain afterwards to hide the shame. And we'll see if we can bring it back that way. Otherwise, it's to the curb, because I don't think it's worth putting that much more effort into. But let's see what we can do. After digging out a bar clamp, it's not really doing much for this crack. It's a little bit closed, but not fully. So it's not gonna be ideal, but I'm gonna have to fill it and stain it. Not as bad as I thought, but yeah. Well, I thought the camera was going, but all you missed was a bunch of me talking, which, let's face it, I talk too much in these sometimes. But I've got a dry fit and a dry clamp here The gaps are better. A couple of them did kind of close up a little bit. This one, not as much as I would have liked. But this side is actually closed up quite a bit, except for over here, but it was pretty bad over here to begin with, so that's about as best I can expect from this. But I actually have a little bit of hope now that, at least from the top, this thing might actually look okay. I'll still have to do some sanding, but for an initial dry clamp, this isn't so bad. Guess there ain't nothing left to do but to glue it, so let's get set up for that. Well, the glue up is now done. I used most every clamp I've got. I'd hope this gap would close a bit more, but it's not going to. But at least it's moved somewhat in. Gaps are okay. Not a lot of glue squeeze out everywhere to clean up. And what has been cleaned up. And even the 1800 C-clamps got to come out and play. I wish this lined up just a little bit better, but that's about the best we can hope for. Well, it's been a few hours. That should be sufficient for this flavor of tight bond. Well, the gaps did not close up very well at all. I don't know if I just couldn't get glue where I needed to in there or what. But the end turned out real well. That's stable, solid. Just, again, the gaps are terrible. So I'll just have to fill, stain, and hope it turns out okay. Because the finish is just gone, there's all kinds of dirt and dust in the pores here of the wood, and I'm not quite sure how best to get all that out. There's all these holes in the veneer. I don't think I'll fix those. It'll just become part of the piece. If this were solid wood, I could probably steam this out. But since it's veneer, I don't think it will. When I wet this down, I can see a few darker spots from the water damage. I don't know if that's enough to merit doing an oxalic acid treatment or not, but I think with this big area here being discolored, that's probably gonna have to be my best bet, is to actually go ahead and do a full strip and sand on this and hit it with the oxalic acid See if this will lighten up just a little bit. Might as well try to do it well while I'm at it. Got to be real careful on this very thin veneer. So I'd like to do this by hand, but I'd also like to do it fast. So we'll tread carefully, I guess. Well, here's the cautionary tale part of this video. 320 grit on that, extremely fine. I wasn't pressing down, it was just very light, just passing over. You can really see how uneven it is, but right there, boom, right through the veneer. This was the worst of the water damaged parts. It was all kinds of wavy, you can see where it's all uneven. I was just trying to smooth it out, but right there, right through. So, same thing along the edge here. This is where it had folded up from where the swelling had occurred on the particle board, right through the veneer. So I'm gonna have to work to hide that damage. And then kind of a similar thing here. This was similarly water damaged. It's still really uneven, but if you're not careful and you go over here with a power tool, it's gonna go right through the veneer. And I didn't want that to happen. I was trying to be careful, but even when you've been here before and you're trying to be careful, it can happen. So I'm gonna do the rest of this by hand, again with 320, very carefully, and try to get this smoothed out enough that I can start working on it with filler. I've got about an hour of hand sanding into it. Still not very excited, but this is an experiment, given that it was ruined. So I think I'm gonna focus on the top and not so much on the legs. I've still got another round over the entire thing. I'm seeing every little dent and ding and weird scuff along the edges. I need to clear out the gap here because it's full of sawdust. And while that does help blend it, it's not really stable. It needs to be some kind of putty. So I'm gonna give it a quick wash and see all the spots I missed. Hit those once more and see what the next step is. Not great, not terrible. I think I've gotten really lucky on this one because when it's wet, to simulate a finish, the areas that got sanded through are not as visible, especially here on the walnut veneer. When it's wet and when there's some kind of finish on it, it vanishes. So that's lucky for me. These ends, both sides were pretty water damaged. This is not really evening up at all. The waviness is there. The dark lines from the original finish are in there where it's too deep to sand. I'm gonna keep trying and try not to sand through it, but it's not gonna be perfect, but you saw what this was before. The sides are coming out okay. I think if I can gently fill that and then sand it back down without going through the veneer, that'll disappear. This side's terrible. This was the worst of the water damaged sides as far as the veneer being messed up goes, and it's uneven, peaks and valleys. There's that dark water damaged original finish in the grain. I can't really sand that much more. I don't want to go through it, but I think if I can gently get some wood filler in there and then sand it out, this gap has a chance of just disappearing. It's already half disappeared because it's full of sawdust. So maybe there's hope for an acceptable finished product. Well, it's time for the oxalic acid treatment. I have mixed up a somewhat strong solution for this one, and we'll see if we can hopefully make this darker area here completely disappear. But of course you treat the entire thing, otherwise it looks uneven and blotchy. Well, let's let that soak in, do its thing, and dry off. We'll have to rinse it off afterwards with some kind of basic solution to neutralize the acid, and we'll see where we're at after that. But I love wetting it down like this because it just gives you a preview of what it could look like once finished. Well, here we are, mostly dry. That stained area is lighter. It's still a bit damp. Looks worse on camera than in person. But if you've never treated a table with oxalic acid, here's why you want to, wash it and neutralize the acid afterwards. I hope it'll show up on camera, but that was a pretty strong oxalic acid solution, and it crystallized, so you have all these little crystals of acid in the wood grain. So I'll use a basic mix of water to get that out of there. Now the table is still pretty damp, so I'll probably go ahead and neutralize that solution on or off camera. I don't know if I'll do another treatment of oxalic. From this angle it does look kind of dark, but I'll do something, let it dry overnight, and probably start addressing the gaps another day. Well, go figure. If you put moisture on a table that was already water damaged, the veneer starts to come back up. I see more wood glue in my future. This thing is fighting me all the way back. Well, we're on the third oxalic acid treatment, and I just don't think that this spot is gonna get any lighter. In fact, the water damage spot here is getting too light, and I'm gonna have to hide that with some stain. So I'm probably gonna cut my losses and wash and neutralize this and move on to the next steps. I've been doing some test areas with some filler, and it's not going well. The stuff says that it'll accept a stain, but it is really not accepting stain. I just put the brush down and it's still wet. But yeah, you can see exactly where there's filler. It just does not blend. I was hoping to kind of hide the areas where the veneer was sanded through. I still need to fill this entire side here, but yeah, it's obvious, and it's not going to be perfect. This one's probably the most egregious spot. It's just not taking the stain, and I guess I'm going to have to be okay with that, because I knew going in that this thing is a piece of salvage anyways. So if it can pass the test of standing way over here and saying, hey, that looks okay, that'll be good enough. And just once more with the thing neutralized and soaking wet. Yeah, dark spot's really dark with the light spot. Filler is just as bad as I thought it was gonna be. But if you're standing over here, You know, a few feet away from it, it kind of looks the part. It might be okay. The last of the veneer restabilization should be done once this sets overnight and I can remove the clamps. All of the wood filling is done. It's not great, but since that filler would not take stain, I had to take an elementary school type of approach and dig out some colored pencils from 20 years ago, probably. I don't know. But that has really reduced the lightness and really blends it in. In fact, here's where I burned through the veneer. The table's been rotated since then, but you can't even really see because I drew in some fake wood grain. So if you can't tell from here, you definitely won't be able to tell from back here, and that's good enough. This edge is just not perfect. It's still swollen on that side, smooth here, swollen right here, and then smooth back out here. I just don't want to sand it anymore because I don't want to go through the veneer again. But I think we're just about ready to wrap this one up. Normally I would be spraying outside, but the heat index is 108 today. So I'm gonna do a quick spray of this inside. I'm really low on shellac. I thought I had a whole other can of this. So I think I can get one very thin coat on, and then I'll have to go buy some more. I severely underestimated the amount of shellac left in this can. And all my masking fell off, so this is about keeping in line with the rest of the project. Let me go buy some more shellac. About 2 coats in, 2.5 around the edges. It's not good. It's really soaking in unevenly. You can really see the water damage spots that are glued down but not laying flat. It's got a lot of gloss to it, but you know, that's the nature of shellac. But I guess the silver lining here is that all of that filler has pretty much disappeared with colored pencils. So, task failed successfully. The GoPro's SD card tried to bamboozle me there. I think I've got a couple of bad sectors on it, so I don't know if it even recorded what I was trying to record earlier. But I was using shellac as a finish. I like it just because it seals whatever the material is you're working with. This table's been sitting around for 4 years in the house, so there's no active mildew on it, but it still had a mild odor to it. This will lock that in and it won't stink anymore. It's a bit glossy, a lot glossier than I'd like, but I can probably cut that down a little bit with a little sanding and then another coat of this. It's not going on very evenly, but I'm hoping maybe a 3rd coat will even it out just a little bit. So let's try that. Well, I took a break for a little over an hour, hour and a half, had a beer about it, you know, and decided that probably the proper course of action would be to hit this thing with 4/0 steel wool, knock that gloss down. I think that is going to be the right approach, but unfortunately I rested my hand on it, and now there's a couple of hand prints in there. So I have to work this over a little bit more. But I think that'll be the proper course of action. And while I was sitting around having a beer about it, I'm seeing that these legs are looking terrible compared to the rest of it, and not very glossy, so I'm probably gonna go ahead and just put a coat of shellac on the legs too while I'm at it, just so they don't look so out of place. Well, that looks better than I thought it would. It evens it out quite a bit, even though a full sand strip refinish would have been ideal, just not great for this piece. I guess while I'm here, I might as well repaint the feet. That's kind of their part of their signature, is the black feet. Yep, that was the right move. Well, there we have it. I did one more coat of shellac over the top, and then I knocked down the gloss one more time with some 4/0 steel wool, and I think it turned out acceptable for what I had to work with. So I guess let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Is this a legitimate salvage? Did I bring it back well enough given what it was, in spite of the water damage, the staining, the veneer damage, the core of it being swollen and messed up, the entire side of it being knocked off? Should I have gone further by redoing the legs as well, or did I go just far enough by shellacking those and just making them kind of match the gloss of the rest of it, and then repainting the feet just so it looks fresh, even though it's a piece of salvage, honestly? But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I think that'll be it for this one. I'm glad to have, this is my 8th piece of Lane Acclaim here in the living room. I've got the 2 end tables, some snack tables, a set of nesting tables, and the sofa table over there. I'm very happy to have those, but having a coffee table in here now kind of ties the room together. So I'm kind of pleased with the results, I think. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye for now.